Her love triangle inspired 3 of the most popular songs ever written. Being creative is a peculiar, elusive thing. On some days, creativity is very elusive, while other times it appears to emerge effortlessly from thin air. Yet artists often have muses that inspire them to create their art. Amazingly, 2 guys who were both deeply moved by the same lady went on to write 3 of the most well-known songs of the 20th century in this manner. The lady in question is Pattie Boyd, a stunning English model who has now earned a place in popular culture. Boyd stood at the confluence of fashion, rock and roll, art, and stardom in the 1960s, according to Harper's Bazaar in 2018. The young lady represented what writer Tom Hibbert would later refer to as the British feminine appearance of the time. Boyd was in high demand as a model as well, often appearing in picture assignments for French Elle, British Vogue, and Vanity Fair. She's appeared in ads for Smith's and L'Oreal and was in a coveted Tatler editorial with renowned photographer Jean-Luc Sieff. So it should come as no surprise that Boyd became a fashion symbol for young British women. They want to seem immaturely youthful and naively innocent, which is something Mary Quant pointed out in 1966, saying, "Yet it takes more skill to figure out that appearance than those early would-be sophisticates ever thought of." Boyd also married a renowned man at the height of her celebrity, none other than George Harrison of the Beatles. She discussed her first contact with Harrison in 1964 when the Beatles were filming the movie A Hard Day's Night in her memoirs, Beautiful Tonight, published in 2007. During the time, Britain and much of Europe was in the grip of Beatlemania, the model remembered. Of course, the same could be said for America, where the band had just made their big screen debut on The Ed Sullivan Show. Boyd said, "I was a model and worked with some of London's most well-known photographers, such as David Bailey and Terence Donovan. I was being featured in publications like Vanity Fair and Vogue, as well as newspapers. Nevertheless, in March, my agency sent me to a movie casting call. Unluckily, Boyd later learned that she'd been selected for the part of a schoolgirl fan in a Beatles film. She therefore got to meet the gang. On first impression, John looked more cynical and aggressive than the others," she said in her book. "With velvet brown eyes and rich chestnut hair, George was the best-looking guy I'd ever seen. Ringo was the cutest, Paul was adorable." Boyd and Harrison quickly became close. The model stated, "During a break for lunch, I found myself seated next to George. It was exciting to be so close to him. I almost heard him ask me, 'Would you marry me?' first." It was a tinge of seriousness mixed in with his jokes. Soon after that, we started dating, and on January 21st, 1966, we were married. He was 22 and I was 21. I was ecstatic and deeply in love. Unfortunately, however, this joy would not endure. After visiting the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram in India in 1968, George had developed an obsession with meditation, according to Boyd. He would sometimes retreat and feel down. His emotions began to reflect mine, and sometimes I experienced despair. She was aware that Harrison was also sleeping with Boyd. Boyd said, "There were other ladies which really devastated me. The Didi Krishna, who was usually surrounded by young women, intrigued George. He wanted to be some sort of Krishna figure when he returned from India, a spiritual person with a large number of concubines. He did indeed say that. No lady was off limits." Then there was the French lady Eric Clapton had been dating. When she split up with the cream star, Harrison ended up having an intimate connection with her, which naturally made Boyd feel terrible. Moreover, Clapton started to spend more time with Harrison around this time, and the two started to collaborate musically. Boyd gradually began to spend more time with Clapton by proxy. But she discovered that the man behind the theatrical act was quite different. He didn't act like a rock star when I met him. Boyd subsequently wrote about the artist. He was shockingly reserved and bashful, and she was delighted in his interest in her. Boyd said, "When I saw Clapton gazing at me, or when I decided to sit next to him, it was hard to not feel pleased. He gave me compliments on my attire and the food I had prepared, and he said things that he knew would amuse me. All of them were things George stopped doing." Boyd then learned that Clapton had used her as the inspiration for a brand new song. She recounted, "We met incognito in an apartment in South Kensington. The most stirring music I've ever heard was playing for me by him, and turning off the tape player and turned up the volume. Boyd said it was a song called Layla, about a guy who has an unrequited love for a lady who isn't accessible. He played it for me 2 or 3 times, all the while keeping a close eye on my face to see how I would respond. My God, everyone's gonna know this is about me, was my first thought. While I was married to George Harrison, a close friend of Eric's, Boyd stated that Eric had been expressing his love for me for months. He was pushing me in a path that I wasn't sure I wanted to go, and that made me feel uncomfortable. The music eventually won me over, however, as I became aware of how much passion and creativity I had sparked. Boyd acknowledged I couldn't resist any longer. She described how she had attended a gathering at Cream manager Robert Stigwood's house alone that same evening. There, the connection between the model and Clapton got started. Boyd said in her memoirs, "It was a terrific party and I felt delighted by what had transpired earlier in the day, but also very guilty. George showed up in the early hours. He was depressed, and entering a party where most of the attendees were under the influence of drugs and had been going on for many hours didn't make him feel any better." Harrison kept asking, "Where's Patty?" but nobody appeared to know, Boyd said. He saw me in the garden with Eric just as he was ready to leave. He was quite hazy and just beginning to grow light. "What's happening?" George questioned when he approached. "I have to tell you, Guy, that I'm in love with your wife," Eric remarked to my dismay. It may seem that Boyd was stunned by Clapton's blunt revelation. "I wanted to die," she wrote. George was indignant. "Are you going with him or are you coming with me?" he said as he turned to face me. She made the decision to go home with her spouse that evening, but Clapton had made it very obvious what his goals were. He wanted Boyd for himself. Derek and the Dominoes, Clapton's post-Cream band, only released one album, which included Layla. Several reviewers have acclaimed Clapton's 1970 album, Layla, and other assorted love songs as his best work. It has a cover of Billy Miles' "Have You Ever Loved a Woman" as well. The lyrics of the cover song appropriately refer to an infatuation with a close friend's wife. In addition, Boyd shared her thoughts on Clapton and the Layla record in a 2005 interview on CNN. "I believe that he was an extraordinarily raw at the moment," she remarked. "Because of his outstanding musicianship, the listener can instantly sense the emotions he expresses in his songs. It immediately permeates you." Boyd provided The Guardian with a more nuanced perspective in 2008, nevertheless. "I wasn't too pleased when Eric penned Layla. While I was still wed to George," the woman said, "I thought I was being found out. I was astounded and ecstatic by the song since it was so intensely dramatic and emotional, yet I wanted to maintain my marriage." Boyd stayed with Harrison after Clapton confessed his love for her. In fact, as a result, in the early 1970s, the guitarist sought solace in heroin, later estimating that he was spending about $16,000 per week on it at the time. Additionally, he withdrew from the public eye, spending the majority of his time alone in his mansion in Surrey and appearing on stage only occasionally. The thing about that kind of addiction that's pretty funny, on reflection, is that I always thought, "I'm handling this," Clapton said to NPR in 2007. "It won't bother me. I can quit anytime. I just don't want to quit at this moment." Nonetheless, Boyd and Clapton started living together in 1974 when she ultimately made the decision to end her relationship with Harrison. Then, in 1979, Clapton and Boyd were married, but the relationship wouldn't last. Throughout the majority of their marriage, the rock singer was an alcoholic, and Boyd soon started drinking excessively as well. He was also consistently unfaithful, which led to the couple's eventual separation and eventual divorce in 1989. She was unable to bear children, which served as a defining characteristic of both of Boyd's marriages. "I believed that automatically when I grew up and got married, I'd have children," she told the Daily Mail in 2019. "Regrettably, I didn't experience it. I only believed that it fit with the notion of being a lady. Nevertheless, when it didn't happen," Boyd added, "I began to freak out and wonder why." She and Clapton also attempted in vitro fertilization, but it didn't work. "It takes a long time to gain a handle on reality and bite your lip," bemoaned the former model, "once you accept that it won't happen to you." Boyd eventually accepted her infertility, however, and took the decision to alter her perspective. In her interview with the Daily Mail, she said, "After you get over it, you realize you've got fantastic pals and life is beautiful. I think we can't control nature. Everything that occurs in life is for a reason." Yet, Layla wasn't the only song about Boyd that had ever been created. The Beatles frontman wrote Something in 1969, 3 years after she and Harrison wed, as an ode to his wife. "George informed me in a matter-of-fact manner that he had written it for me," Boyd said in her memoir. That was gorgeous, and it ended up being the most popular song he'd ever written, with more than 150 cover versions.